As you look at the subject line of this particular video, you're already thinking, more Telnet. How in the heck did you find more Telnet to talk about? Telnet. Yes, Telnet. And the reason I made this video, not only to show you a few other Telnet session commands I'd like you to know for the exam, but also I get messages all the time about just asking me how I go through the routers when we're in a lab. You know, how I'm going from one to the other, what the number is, etc. Now, right now, I do have a 3-part series out on YouTube. I made it a couple of years ago when they had the 10-minute time limit, so I had to chop it up a little bit, segment it a little bit. And it's out there and it's fine, it's up to date, but I'm going to make a new one in October 2013. And actually, when I do that, I would not only put it on my YouTube channel, which you should come out and join. The videos are great and you can't beat the cost. But also, I will post that one here right after this one when it's ready. So there's no need to ask me, you know, hey, have you done that one yet? Because when I have, I will have it right here for you as well. But again, the IP host table that you see in access server configuration is not going to be part of your exam, but I do get asked a lot about it, so I want you to see that, and also some things you likely will be asked about the exam we're going to demo during this discussion. So as I go around the routers and switches, you know, we're going back and forth, and then there's a Bryant Advantage prompt for a few seconds, and then I go to another router. You might be wondering first what those numbers are that I'm typing in, and secondly, how I'm getting back to the access server, which is that central device. I'm using a Cisco access server, which in this case is just a good old-fashioned Cisco router that has access server capability. If you are looking for an access server, I'm not going to give you a particular vendor to look at, but you do not have to spend $25,000 on an access server. I get messages on that occasionally too, because people will go out to eBay and look at Cisco access server, and sometimes it's like the most expensive ones are near the top. And I honestly don't know what the older access servers are going for, but believe me, the one that I use in my pod I bought a long time ago, and there's no reason to buy a more recent router to replace it, because the only thing I use it for is an access server. That's it. So you do not have to go, mortgage your house or, max out a credit card, something like that if you're looking for one of those. Now, each of my routers and switches in the pod, in turn, is connected to the access server via an octal cable. And this is a strange looking cable. It's a cable that has a long single connector on one end, an async connector, and that connects to the access server itself. The other end has 8 individual RJ45 connectors. They're actually individual cables at the other end that branch out at a certain point, and those connect to the console port of the individual routers and switches. Now, here's the IP host table on my access server that makes everything happen. And this is how I'm using the host names instead of continually typing in an IP address or a line number or anything like that. So we're not going any further into that part of the config right now. But what I did want to show you, and actually maybe at the bottom of this, here's what I usually do before I start the videos, or what I always do, is I open the Telnet connections to each router and switch that I'm going to use in that lab via their host names thanks to that IP host table. And I'll show this to you live as well. It's the exact same thing we're seeing there. And you can see here I've opened the connection to router 1. I've gone back to the Bryant Advantage 1, which is the access server. And there's R2, and now I'm back at the access server and R3. And if you're wondering how I got back to the access server, hang in there. We are getting to that. But that's how you open the Telnet connections via an IP host table. Now, one thing about the access server you have to get used to is that you can't go directly from one router to the next in your pod. That is, when I'm configuring something on router 1 and then I want to go to router 2 and show you something, I don't go directly from 1 to 2. I go from 1 to the access server and back out to router 2. And it sounds complicated, but once you've started doing it and practice it, I don't even think about it now. And believe me, when I started, I had to think about it a lot because it just seemed a little complex. It's really not. And now, of course, we need to answer the musical question, how did I get back to the access server? With Control-Shift-6 followed by hitting X. And it sounds like a tough keystroke, but again, once you practice it, you do it a few times. I get messages regularly. I get emails, tweets, whatever, carrier pigeons that come in and tell me, I can't get this keystroke. And I don't think this information or this misinformation is out there. When I started my studies, I'm not kidding, the book that I used said the keystroke was Control-Shift-6X. all at one time. So I'm sitting there, twisting my fingers trying to do it in that order. And it turned out it was actually two separate keystrokes. So again, it's Control-Shift-6, let that go, and then hit X. And again, it's just something, once you practice it, and then people always write back to me and say, hey, I got it. I don't even think about it now. Now, here's something good to know for your exam, as well as working with an Access server. It's very important to note that when I go back to the Access server from one of my routers, I'm not closing that Telnet connection. I'm suspending it. And I'm not, picking nits there. There is a big difference. Because right now, if I try to use one of the full host names to go back to that router, I'm going to get an error message. Connection refused by remote host. This is something else I get emails and tweets and carrier pigeons on. Because somebody will say, hey, I got this thing rolling and I don't understand because, I've got the lines open and I connection refused by remote host. Once you open these Telnet connections, you need to reopen them or unsuspend them, or however you want to put it, by using the connection number. And with mine, I try to keep it, my connection 1 goes to R1, connection 2 goes to R2, connection 3 goes to R3. You see the pattern, and then I just put my switches on the end. But what you can do, if you get a little confused about what lines you've got open and whatnot, run show session, and oddly enough, the command where also does this. And where, I guess, is just, where am I, or where are my other routers? I'm not quite sure where came from, but we can use either one of these commands to see what our connections are. Now, notice the asterisk here. This is a classic gotcha, and it continues to bite me on the behind or grind my gears every once in a while because it's so easy to do. What that indicates is your last open connection, the last connection you were on. So if you hit the Enter key by itself, it's going to resume the connection to router 3. Now, you do have to hit the Enter key again. You can't just hit it once, because your first one, yeah, you've resumed it, but to see the prompt, you're going to have to hit it again. I've always seen it that way. I've never seen it where you just hit Enter one time and you've got the prompt there. That's a real world note for you, because that's something else I get carrier pigeons on. So, because then people hit Enter one more time and they write me and say, I'm sorry. And I always just say, hey, look, it's part of the learning experience. So you do have to hit it twice. Now, Control-Shift-6X to go back. The reason I mentioned that, that grinds my gears and or bites me in the behind is because between labs, actually, I like to clear my screen. If we're getting started on an EIGRP lab, I don't want OSPF tables or all the, muckety-muck, if you will, technical term there, that all the old information up on the screen or all the info about me clearing out the old routers. You just like to start with the old config. You just like to start with a clear screen. Well, if you do that, let's just say that I lean on the Enter key right now. Let's say I wanted to start a new video. I didn't want any of this on the screen, and I hit Enter. Well, that's actually what happens. It's going to resume connection 3 to R3. There's nothing wrong with that. You could go ahead and just keep hitting Enter and then go back to your Access server. But when you're starting in particular, it is really easy to not realize that you've moved to another router. I've done that once or twice myself. But it is a classic, I don't even want to say mistake, it's just something you do, accidentally, which I guess makes it a mistake. It's not an intentional error on your part, but you think you're configuring router 2 and something's not working, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I'm configuring router 3, how did I get there? Or I thought I was configuring my Access server and instead I'm on R3, how did that happen? Guarantee you it was you hitting the Enter key. So just be careful with that one. So let's see, we've talked about show session and where, we know about that part. Now what about resuming the connections? Well, there are two different ways to do that as well. What you've seen me do in all of my courses, and it's just the one way I do it, is just to enter the connection number. That's it. So you hit 1, hit Enter, and you're there. Go back with Control-Shift-6X, hit 2, Enter twice, you're there. Hit 3, Enter once, you got resuming connection, and hit Enter twice, you've got your prompt. There is technically another way you can do it, you should know for your exam. The full command here is, and actually I didn't mean to hit it there, but resume right here in the middle. Resume an active network connection. That's what you're actually doing. So if you type resume and then use iOS help, you're going to see all these other options that you may use one day or you may not use, but here's the one that we're using right there. the number of an active network connection. Of all the commands we use in this course, this resume is probably the one I use the least, but it is a good one to know for your Telnet connection. So if I hit resume one, it's the exact same thing as putting in just the connection number. Good thing to know for your exam. Finally, when you're all wrapped up here, what are you going to do, especially if you're at a client site? Let's say that you've opened a bunch of Telnet connections inside, and they come back later and they see all these Telnet connections still open. They're not going to be real happy with you. You should always disconnect all of your Telnet connections, especially when you're on a client site. And all you do for that, I bet you can guess by the emphasis I put on that particular word, is use disconnect and then follow it with the connection number. It's going to ask for a confirmation. Just hit enter and you're good. That one is now gone. And you could just knock off 2 and 3 at the same time, or with disconnect 2 and disconnect 3, and that would get rid of all of it. I'm going to have all of this in the guide if you choose to get one of those. And we covered resume and we covered disconnect. I wanted to give you a quick one-screen Telnet summary here. And just a couple of reminders here with Telnet, since we've had it in a couple different spots here in this part of the course. Remember, your incoming Telnet users are put into user exec mode by default and can enter privilege exec mode only by giving the enable password or the enable secret when prompted. Now, if there isn't an enable password, as we saw, incoming Telnet users, can't go into privileged mode. They have to sit in user exec, and there's not much you can do from there. If you want to put incoming users into privilege exec mode automatically after they enter the enable password, after they enable the VTY line password, you can put the privilege level 15 command on the VTY lines. You can also put that in the middle of the username password command when we're building a database. You can put privilege 15 there, that is. To suspend a Telnet connection, Control-Shift-6, then X, 2 separate keystrokes. You can thank me later. To view the current connections, you can run show sessions or where. To reopen a suspended connection, enter the connection number by itself or use the resume command followed by the connection number, and then hitting the enter key reopens the most recently opened connection. We definitely want to be careful with that one. And then finally, to close Telnet sessions, use the disconnect command followed by the connection number. That is it for Telnet for now, I promise. Let's move on.